Now at McDonald's, a McDouble is $2.50, so you can get your gym gains on. Or just get lunch for only $2.50. Get more value on the under $3 menu.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast, the show that explores the background of Tolkien's amazing world from the very beginning. So our party is about halfway through the forest, but they don't know it yet. And they've reached the river that Bjorn has warned them is not something that they want to step foot in or be fully doused in or drink from, anything like that. And they found a boat and they're making their way across. And we are at the point in their journey through Mirkwood where things are about to change. So far, they've been going through a part of the forest that appears highly corrupted and almost evil. All the animals are black. Spiderwebs span the trees at their sides, but yet somehow don't cross the path. Everything seems gloomy, and at night, they can't even see the hands in front of their faces. But we're about to see something very different. Once they get across this river, and it's no easy task, the forest starts to change. It goes from being something that is corrupted and dark to something that is actually a little bit more fair. Something that seems to have living creatures in it, and maybe even people, but the interactions with those things become mysterious and spooky in their own way. So before we get into the details of this episode, I just need to remind all of you once again about the nature of the fairy, the Fae. It is a wonderful and yet dangerous place where you can find creatures of all sorts, and sometimes the things that look dark are not necessarily evil. Something like Bjorn, for example, seems scary, a man who turns into a bear, but turns out to be a valuable ally in the end. And sometimes the things that appear to be fair are actually dangerous or disturbing. So let's continue with the party and their journey across Mirkwood. This section of the story starts with Bilbo. Bilbo says, "Who will cross first?" And of course, he's talking about the river, them getting across the river. And this immediately is interesting me. This dialogue choice and the choice of words, the decisions that are being made here. Bilbo is the first one to think about how do we move forward. He's taking a sort of leadership position, but less of a leadership position and more of a strategist, somebody who is looking over the well-being of everybody. He continues to fill the role that Gandalf used to fill, although I don't think anyone suspects this yet. In fact, I don't think Bilbo even understands that that's what's happening here. In his mind, it appears that he's just being concerned about their safety and how they're going to continue on this journey in order to get out of this forest, but he really is playing the role of Gandalf for the party. He just doesn't know it yet. And Thorin responds, "I shall. I'll be the first across, and you will come with me, and Fili and Balin." And then they discuss how many people can fit in each boat, 4 people, so it divides up as groups of 4 until you end up with 2, and Bomber goes at the end. But before we get into the details about that, I think it's notable here that Thorin is the leader of the party, and he chooses to lead from the front. He says, "I shall. I will go first." Not because he wants some sort of glorious entry into this next thing, or he thinks that he should be the first on the boat because he should always be first because he's the rightful heir, any of those things. It's because he is the kind of leader who leads from the front. He does so that everyone else knows that they can do too. This is a good sign. Also, notice the composition of the first 4 that go in this boat. You have Bilbo and Thorin and Fili and Balin. Up until now, everybody is usually grouped together. You have Philly and Killy, right? Owen and Glowin, Dory and Ori and Nori. Everybody kind of fits together with their kin, or the people at least have similar names. You know how it goes. But this is divided up. Bilbo, Thorin, Philly, and Balin. Why would that be? Well, you have a diversity of individuals. You have Thorin, who tends to be the most capable of the dwarves and is their leader. You have Bilbo, who is typically seen by the dwarves to be, at least up until recently, the least of the party. He's also the smallest. Then you have Philly and Balin. Both of these are trustworthy members of the group, of course, but they are different in age. Philly is young, Balin is old. You have a diversity here in this first boat that means that they can take on whatever comes their way and they can support and fill in for the deficits of each other. I think this is a subtle thing, and it's not something most people note because you'd get all of these names and they're all kind of thrown together. But I would have to imagine that this comes from a place of experience, and a lot of this stuff goes back to Tolkien's time in the military and the kinds of things that they would do with drills with their fellow soldiers in order to breach a wall, cross a river, do all sorts of things like this. And I would imagine that they would learn the benefits of using the skills of the people around them and filling in for the things that they need to fill in order to create a balanced group, a balanced squad that's able to take on anything. In fact, if you look at the nature of World War I or World War II warfare, the way that they set up the squads and balanced the squads with the other squads that would go into battle together was exactly to do this. You would have, for example, and this is a World War II thing, and I know Tolkien served in World War I, but in World War II, you would have a machine gun group that would shoot off into the distance in order to suppress the enemy, and then you would have another squad of riflemen who would flank the side of the enemy, and these groups would work together. You would then have a mortar group who would pound the position of the enemy once they were hunkered down, trying to avoid the machine gun fire. Each of these groups would be vulnerable individually, but all together, they worked to make each other stronger. And yes, of course, I don't need anybody writing me letters about, well, Tolkien didn't serve in World War II and the tactics in World War I were slightly different. But the point is that even in World War I, they would compensate for the limitations of the other people in their squads or across their larger groups or whatever those words are called. I don't have all the details in front of me, but I think you get the point. And that's interesting to me. And so they divide everybody up. And of course, you have Dwalin and then Bombur, who are the two in the final boat. And as we know, Bombur is much bigger than the other dwarves. He kind of counts for two sometimes. So that's two people who count for three. But all in all, they're still the lightest boat. And we get this other moment where Bombur complains, "I'm always last and I don't like it." Because it's true. He's been put last a lot. And then Thorin responds, "You should not be so fat." And again, feels like fat shaming in 2025 as I'm recording this, but back here at this time, it was probably done for comedic effect. And it is kind of funny to think of a rotund dwarf, especially because dwarfs tend to be shorter, so he would be much wider, and it does create kind of a comedic scene, right? But he's right to complain. Also, Thorin's justification here is that you're going to be in the lightest boatload, and that needs to be the last one. But I'm not sure why the last boat needs to be the lightest. That doesn't necessarily make any sense to me. Why wouldn't the first boatload be the lightest? Is there some sort of benefit there? Nothing comes to mind. So if you have some thoughts on that, please let me know about that. Now, they have another dilemma, and this is part of them working through, think of this in modern terms, as we've played through many different video games over the years or watched many different adventure movies or those kinds of things. This almost works like a dungeon. Mirkwood is a dungeon, not in the sense that it's an underground place where you would put captives, but in the sense of it being a field for adventure, a map area where the individuals have to solve the puzzles and make their way through while the tension continues to ratchet up. That's what we're getting here. And so they're going to continue to come across problems or puzzles that they have to solve, just like they've been doing before. And every time they work their way further and further into the dungeon, the problems become more tricky or more dangerous. And on top of that, the scene starts to evolve. Things begin to change, and they build towards some sort of climax. And of course, that makes sense for fantasy writing and novels in general. Everything kind of has that structure, right? But it still works for dungeons. In fact, that's one of the big ideas in a dungeon. You play something like Skyrim, and you go into a dungeon, and at the end of the dungeon is some sort of big bad boss or monsters or situation that you have to deal with, and then you get rewarded. And sometimes the reward is meager, and sometimes it's something amazing. We are in the very middle of this dungeon at this point. And the problem that crops up now is not just that they can't fall into the river or drink from it or try not to touch the water at all. It's that they don't have oars. This boat seems to just be on one side of the river with no means to drive it across the water. It's not like they could put a sail on it. There's no wind. Oars would be the only solution. Why are the oars missing? Maybe they fell in the water and they disappeared a long time ago. Nobody knows. But Philly comes up with a solution. And you would think maybe Bilbo would do it. He's been the solution guy so far, but no, it's Philly. And maybe it's because Philly is the same one who already had the rope and the hook. And so they devise a plan to use the rope and the hook in order to move the boat back and forth. And it's pretty clever. So once they do this, the river puzzle is solved. Da, 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 da. I should put a little sound effect in there. I've just talked about Skyrim. That's Final Fantasy. For those of you who are video game nerds like I am, you'll get the idea. Anyway, so they move across the river, and then something very strange and unexpected happens. And I love the way that this plays out. The first half of this forest has built our expectations around what we would assume the rest of the forest to be like. Very little animal life. Things are very quiet. Everything is very dark. All of the creatures are black or they look corrupted. There's something wrong with this place. And notice of the creatures that they have seen, spiders, squirrels, the little eyes in the night, everything seems to also be small. This doesn't seem like the kind of forest where larger creatures would be. And yet, all of a sudden, as soon as they are on the other bank, or at least most of them are on the other bank, we get something very unexpected. A flying deer. Now, let's get this right. The use of the word flying here does not mean moving through the air. It means moving quickly, and a deer often jumps and kind of hops around, so it is levitated off the ground for moments at a time. So the word flying makes sense for how a deer would move, even if it doesn't have wings and fly through the sky. And deer are not seen as aggressive animals. Why would a deer be headed directly to them? Why would it bowl over everybody and then attempt to jump across this river? And we know the river is fairly wide, and yet this deer is moving very fast and seems to be capable of making a leap like that. This is odd. This is completely unexpected, and yet it happens. And then Thorin, who's the only one with any wits about him at all, because he's prepared for what might happen on this other bank, because, again, they can't see very well. He takes a shot with his arrow, and he hits the deer. And the deer seems to land on the other side and is killed, or at least stops moving. Yet they can't reach the deer. Remember, they're running low on food already. Their packs are getting lighter. This would have been a wonderful feast for them at this point, as long as it wasn't corrupted and blackened. But it doesn't seem to be a corrupted animal. It seems to be an animal that is flying from something. It reminds me of the line, "Fly, you fools," that Gandalf says in Moria. I also think it's worth noting here that the description about Thorin says that he was the only one who kept his feet and his wits. In order to shoot an arrow accurately, you have to be planted on the ground securely to do that. He can't try to do this while walking. That would be much more difficult. It's hard to aim a bow and arrow while moving and be accurate at all. So he plants his feet, which is an interesting detail here about understanding how most people would have to shoot an arrow. And again, sure, I'm sure there are people who are trick shooters who can do this while moving or on the back of horses. That has been highly documented, especially historically. The people of the steppes of Asia were known for being very good at this, Mongols, communities like that. But for this group, they would plant their feet just like most people would in order to take a steady shot. And then we are presented with the next puzzle. Bomber falls in the water. It's time for that spring reset. I'm taking a look at everything in my closet and figuring out that, oh no, this absolutely needs to go. And it's about time I replace things so that my clothes aren't older than my 15-year-old. Now you might think that they lasted that long because they were well made, but no, they're in terrible condition. Unlike the new jeans I just got from Quince. Jeans have always been my personal go-to because you can kind of wear them for lots of different things, but maybe they're not your thing. Maybe you're looking for, 100% European linen with insanely soft flow knit activewear fabric. It's definitely getting warmer, and their flow knit activewear is moisture wicking, anti-odor, and soft enough that you'll actually want to wear it every day. So pick out what you want. You can't go wrong because they have prices 50 to 60% less than similar brands. And like I said before, they are high quality. I continue to wear their clothes all the time, and I know that these new jeans are going to last me a lot better than the other things in my wardrobe. And on top of it, they look great. They're so comfortable. And I spent just as much on the jeans that I am now cleaning out of my wardrobe. So if you're looking for something better, just all around better, go check out Quince. So go do it right now. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/ringslore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. Go to quince.com/ringslore for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/ringslore. Bomber has fallen in. Bomber is drowning, Bilbo cries. And again, Bilbo's the first one to notice here. He's the one watching over the party. And we get this detail about him reaching out to cross onto the land and then trying to get off the boat, and then the boat getting pushed away into the water, and it disappears. And I love the description of his hands slipping off the slimy roots at its edge. If anybody has spent time swimming in a lake where there are trees growing on the sides, you'll know what that feels like. The roots are slimy. And if you try climbing up them, it doesn't work very well. And there's something else interesting about this interaction to me as well. It's not as if he hits the water and is immediately put to sleep. It takes a moment. And the moment is enough for them to toss him the rope and for him to grab onto the rope. And then while they are pulling him up, it seems like he falls asleep then. And this is a magical type of sleep. One of the things they note here is that his hand will not let go of the rope. It's as if he's petrified. This is a magical type of sleep. This isn't a normal type of sleep. When somebody is deeply asleep, it's not very hard to, say, open up their hands or move their arms. They tend to be very limp. But this is not that. This is something very different. And this is the first sign that this is different. The next sign is that he has a funny smile on his face, as if he is being served pleasant dreams in this magical sleep, which makes sense, because if you want somebody to stay asleep, then give them good dreams. They won't want to wake up. And then things become even more strange. They can hear sounds in the distance, and these sounds are not expected. The blowing of horns in the wood, the sounds of dogs baying far off. This sounds like a hunt. But a hunt through the forest that they've already been through doesn't make any sense. The forest ahead must be different, or these sounds must not actually be real. There's something very odd and mysterious about this. And of course it's still dark, but yet they see no signs of this. It sounds like it's north of the path, and that means that it's further into the woods on the north side. It's very strange. But it does explain why the deer ran into them on the path. It was running away from the hunters. It was avoiding whoever was out there. And so far, the assumption would be probably nobody up to any good, but yet this does sound odd. Horns and dogs are not things you associate with goblins, for example. It would be wargs instead, and wargs are not dogs, and the goblins didn't really use horns or go on hunting patrols. That feels like something much more fantasy-like, something a little bit more regal. And then we see another deer, actually more than just one. Suddenly the path ahead appeared some white deer, a hind and fawns as snowy white as the heart had been dark. So the first deer is a transition from the dark part of the forest into this new part of the forest. It still is dark, but it's not like the other animals. And then these deer are white. And that absolutely feels symbolic to me. Across all literature, white deer have been symbolic for a number of different things. Purity or innocence, transformation, the unattainable illusory quest, guidance or destiny, also supernatural and otherworldly things. And you could make an argument that these white deer showing up here can represent all of these things. Their story is in transition. The forest itself is transitioning from a place that is dark to a place that is deeply mysterious. And as we learn later, this hunting party isn't orcs or goblins, it's elves. And elves are a very different kind of thing. So we get these deer, and we get the reaction of the party to these deer. They all decide to start shooting their arrows because, well, this seems like a good opportunity. These are some of the first good-looking animals they've come across in a long time, and deer is something they absolutely could cook and eat. But they use all their arrows. And Thorin is the one who says, stop, but it's too late. They've loosed all of their arrows, and unlike in some of the video games I mentioned before, where it seems like you can kind of have this endless stream of arrows, or you can hold hundreds at a time, these dwarves have a very realistic amount of arrows in their quivers, and it doesn't take that much time to run out. And now, the bows and the arrows that were given to them by Bjorn are basically useless. So in their mind, they've both failed to find food, they are disturbed by the weird sounds in the forest, and they also have to carry Bomber, 4 people at a time, with their packs, and they can barely keep moving. But they do. They continue moving, and we're told here by the narrator that they didn't know it, but they were drawing towards the eastern edge. Now, they were clearly just halfway through the forest, but the eastern edge being closer to this side means that the forest is changing. We're getting thinner trees. Sunlight is beginning to peek through the top of the canopy again. In fact, it seems to be giving everything a greenish glow, and that would make sense if the sun is actually piercing through the leaves and being colored by the green leaves above them. And yet, with all of these changes to the forest, which seem to be a positive thing, we're reminded that they still can't find anything to eat, only funguses and herbs, or herbs if you're American, which doesn't make any sense to me because Americans are more likely to say the H than, say, somebody in the UK. But anyway, herbs with pale leaves and unpleasant smells. So there still is corruption in this part of the forest. It just seems to be lightening up a bit. There's a detail here about no undergrowth and shadows not being so deep. But we also get some other details about the types of trees they're coming across. And over previous episodes, you've noticed that I've noted that they're often mentioned. Tolkien likes to go into the types of trees. And so that has created a curiosity in me. And I've decided to delve a little bit deeper into why specifically these trees, not just from a standpoint of like, this is where they would grow in the forest and this makes sense for the climate that they're in. But there's got to be something more than that. So many times when going through this stuff, I'm like, hey, this part is symbolic. So maybe the idea that they are coming across beech trees is symbolic as well. And it turns out it might be. Beech trees not only make sense for this part of the forest from a climate perspective, but also from the way that they grow. They grow up very tall. They can have canopies that block the sun. Lots of creatures can live in them, all of that kind of thing. But they can also be symbolic. In Celtic mythology, beech trees were considered sacred and symbolic of ancient knowledge. They are about to engage with elves. Who else has ancient knowledge than the elves? Also, in European folklore, beech trees were generally associated with inhabiting spirits, or at least hidden doorways to the Fey realm, where everything isn't exactly the way it seems, especially including the way that time passes. And that's something that the party has been experiencing. everything is so dark, and we get the sense of like, well, they can't really tell day from night. But there's this greater feeling that everything is taking forever. This journey feels longer than it should be. And there's something magical about that. And another really interesting point when it comes to J.R.R. Tolkien is that the forests of Lothlorien are filled with malorn trees. And malorn trees seem very similar to beech trees because of their smooth barks and their golden leaves. And both of these may have been influenced by the actual beech trees that grew near Oxford. So there you go. There's all of this connective material from a real-world standpoint to the mythological. So they continue forward for days, carrying Bombur, who just seems asleep for forever, and things begin to become even more creepy. They hear what is described as disquieting laughter, which makes sense. In a dark place like this, if you were to hear laughter in the distance, it wouldn't be a positive experience. You would think something very odd is going on. They also can hear singing in the distance. And it's for the first time noted here that they realize this isn't goblins. The singing is beautiful, but that also makes it even more eerie and strange. I love the contrast here, and I love contrasts like this in literature, in movies, when you get something that is supposed to feel a certain way, but you put it in a different context so that it feels out of place, which makes it feel odd or stand out in some way. One of the things I love is when you see in a movie, you get some sort of dramatic scene, but then the soundtrack is happy and upbeat, or a what looks like a scary scene, but then you have a love song. Like, the contradiction of that has always played well in my brain. And this feels a lot like that, where this is supposed to be beautiful singing, but the context is all wrong. And then we get the mention of another type of tree, mighty oaks. This part of the valley is filled almost entirely with oaks. And that, again, is probably symbolic. Oaks usually represent things like strength or endurance. They also generally were sacred to the gods, including the Greek gods, the Roman gods, Thor from Norse mythology, and even Perun, who I'm probably mispronouncing, from Slavic mythology. And the reason why this is because they grow very tall and they are full of moisture, and that means that they were likely to be hit by lightning, and lightning is generally associated with those deities: Zeus, Jupiter, Thor, Perun. And in Celtic tradition, they symbolize truth, stability, and hospitality. The Druids, whose name actually might derive from oak, because D-U-I-R stands for oak in Celtic, consider them often be sacred and a place where you would hold ceremonies in the oak groves. And we're about to come across elves holding ceremonies, or at least a party of some sort. And elves are traditionally associated with learning wisdom over time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they always make the best decisions, but in this world, elves are associated with wisdom. So oak trees make sense as they get closer and closer to the elves in the forest. So then we get another leadership decision by Thorin. Is there no end to this accursed forest? Somebody must climb a tree and see if he can get his head above the roof and have a look around. The only way is to choose the tallest tree that overhangs the path. And of course they pick Bilbo because that makes the story more interesting, but the justification here isn't that he has long limbs that will help him climb. It's that as whoever climbs the trees gets closer to the top, the limbs become weaker, and so a lighter person could get higher, and that's what's most important here, to be able to see over the canopy. And we get this description of Bilbo being, hoisted up into the tree, and then he begins climbing. And we have a little bit of comedic relief here. He keeps getting slapped in the eye with the branches, which I think is supposed to be funny. And he slips a few times and catches himself just in time, which I think is also kind of symbolic of the way things happen with Bilbo. He gets in trouble and then he saves himself just in time. He gets out of things just in the nick of time many times in the story. And that happens here as well. And then we get the end of this section. Even though there doesn't seem to be any convenient way up to the top, he makes his way there anyway. And the entire time, he's wondering whether there were spiders in the tree. This is more foreshadowing. It's not just because the trees that they passed in the past had spider webs in them. And then we get the final line. He's wondering how he's going to get down again, except by falling. Thanks for tuning into the show again. I'm so glad that you are all here, and a big welcome to our newest patrons, Matt, R2S, and Captain Legolas Turner. That's a good one. So glad that you all decided to join us and get ad-free episodes and bonus episodes for those of you who signed up at those tiers. And of course, t-shirts and other things. LOTR Lorecast on Patreon. Patreon.com/LOTR Lorecast is where you can go check out all this stuff, and you can get all sorts of things and help support the show. And I genuinely appreciate it. So thank you to everybody who does that. And a special shout out to all of our VIP patrons, AK Music Lover, Aldarian was right, Apollo, Atley Morton, Azel Rezel, Barney D, Bo, Brandy D, Cali Cat, Captain Legolas Turner, I have to remember you're on this list now, Cutter Metalworks, Daniel Nightweaver, David S, David M, Divine Madman, Fulcrum, George B, Gerald CFC, Gimli a Break, Ginger Fury, Huon is My Hero, Jezer, Katie S, Capenna, Lori B, Mason Weathertop, Matt, Nick K, Matt's new on the list too, Richard J, Rivqua, Rosie Rose, The Bestest Boy, TJT, and Tour Son of Hur. Thank you so much for all of your support. And wow, people keep signing up for the VIP patron tier, so that makes this even longer for me to read. But I think that's kind of a fun thing, you know, like, haha, I'm going to add another name on his list. He's going to mess up. So thank you for that. But this week's bonus episode, we had a request to dig a little bit more into Dol Guldur and the necromancy and some of that stuff. So we're going to be taking a look at that. At least that's the plan right now. I haven't recorded it yet, but most likely that's what this week's bonus episode will be about. Also, you can help out by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We don't have any new ones, at least in the US this week that I can see. But if you do, I'll read out your review on a future episode. That means basically if you do it this week before I record the next episode, then you'll get on the next episode. So that's kind of fun. Also, you can share the show with your friends. You can rate it on whatever platforms you're on, all of that stuff. Thank you again for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'm going to go delve into the necromancer. So I'll see you on the other side. Stay safe out there. Thanks for listening to the Lord of the Rings Lorecast. If you'd like to learn more about other fantasy worlds, check out my other podcasts, The Elder Scrolls Lorecast, The Witcher Lorecast, and more at robotsradio.net. If you'd like to reach out, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a note on Twitter at robots_radio, or join our amazing community on the Robots Radio Discord. There are links in the show notes, or just search Robots Radio Discord, or find the link on robotsradio.net. I'll see you next time.